Let's start with a crazy thought. What if I told you that our constant, endless search for comfort is the very thing making us sick, anxious, and miserable? Today, we're diving into the work of Michael Easter and this idea of a comfort crisis. The argument is pretty wild. By intentionally adding some discomfort back into our lives, we can actually become happier, healthier, and just more human. So let's get into it. I want you to picture this. You're standing on an icy tarmac 20 miles above the Arctic Circle. You're about to get into a tiny bush plane, the kind the FAA warns people about. And to top it all off, your pilot turns to you and says that. Well, this is the exact situation author Michael Easter found himself in just before being dropped into one of the most remote places on Earth for 33 days straight.
And that just begs the question, right? Why on earth would anyone trade a warm, safe, comfortable life for the very real chance of, freezing to death or a plane crash? It sounds completely nuts. But the answer to that question holds the key to something so many of us feel like we've lost in our modern world.
To really get it, we have to first understand the problem. And the problem is, we're living through this massive evolutionary mismatch. We've built a world of unbelievable ease, but our bodies and our brains, they're still wired for a world that was hard, dangerous, and anything but comfortable. I mean, the scale here is just mind-boggling. For millions of years, from our earliest ancestors, all the way up to maybe our great-grandparents, life was a struggle. It was a nonstop life-or-death hunt for food, for water, for shelter. Things like air conditioning, smartphones, food delivery, that's all brand new, stuff from the last 100 years or so. Let this number really sink in for a second. 0.004%. That is the tiny, almost non-existent fraction of human history that has been lived in constant comfort. We are basically the first ever subjects in a huge, untested experiment. And folks, the results are starting to come in. And this is the great paradox, right? We've engineered away almost all physical hardship, but we are sicker and more miserable than ever. Think about it. 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. Nearly a third are diabetic or pre-diabetic. And we're seeing these skyrocketing rates of what are called diseases of despair, things like anxiety, addiction, and suicide. Our comfort isn't comforting us. It's actually making us sick.
So, what gives? Why are we so dissatisfied? Well, a huge part of the answer is this fascinating idea called problem creep. Harvard researchers actually studied this. They showed people a bunch of faces, some threatening, some not. As they showed them fewer and fewer threatening faces, you'd think people would relax, but they didn't. They just started labeling neutral faces as threatening. So as our lives get easier, we just move the goalposts. Our brains are hardwired to find problems, even if we have to invent them out of thin air.
So, here's the bottom line. Our brains are running on software built for a world that just doesn't exist anymore. That ancient, powerful drive for comfort, the one that kept our species alive for millennia, is now backfiring. It's become a trap. Okay, so if comfort is the problem, what's the fix? Now, it's not about giving up technology and going back to living in caves. It's about being smart and strategic and reintroducing some very specific, beneficial discomforts into our lives. You can almost think of it like a doctor's prescription. All right, prescription number 1. We need to learn to embrace something we spend our entire lives running away from: boredom. We're taught that being bored is a failure, this empty space we have to fill immediately with our phones. But what if boredom is actually a vital, incredibly productive state for our brains? Get this, 11 hours and 6 minutes. That is the average amount of time Americans spend staring at screens and consuming media every single day. We have, for all intents and purposes, murdered boredom. We never give our minds a single moment of just quiet, unstructured, unfocused time. Now, this really matters because of how our brains work. We basically have two modes. There's focus mode, which is what you're using when you're scrolling Instagram or answering emails. It's draining. But then there's unfocus mode, which gets switched on when you're bored. It's when your mind wanders. This is where you get your best ideas, where you solve problems, where your brain actually gets to rest and recharge. By killing boredom, we're basically running our brains on empty all day long. Prescription number 2 is a lot simpler, but it is just as powerful. Get outside. Some evolutionary psychologists say our concrete cities are like landscapes of despair because our brains evolved for open savannas, not skyscrapers. Nature is the antidote to that. And the cool part is, researchers have come up with a super simple framework for this called the nature pyramid. It starts easy, just 20 minutes in a local park 3 times a week.
That's the dose that's been shown to lower stress hormones. Then you build up to 5 hours a month in some wilder spaces. And the top of the pyramid is a 3-day off-the-grid trip once a year. It's totally scalable.
And that 3-day trip at the top, that's where the real magic happens. Scientists have actually documented something they call the 3-day effect. After just 3 days in the wild without any technology, people's scores on creativity tests jump by a whopping 50%. It lowers stress, boosts happiness, and that feeling of being totally mentally reset sticks with you long after you get home.
Okay, our final prescription is all about physical discomfort, and it taps into one of the most basic, fundamental things humans have always done, carrying heavy things over a long distance. It's something we've completely engineered out of modern life, but it's exactly what our bodies were built to do.
The practice is called rucking, and it's like a fitness cheat code. You get your cardio and your strength training done at the same time. It builds up your entire core, what the military calls the tactical chassis, which is the best defense against the back pain that 80% of us get from sitting all day. And you get all this with a much lower risk of injury than running. So how do we wrap all these ideas together? There's this really powerful Japanese concept called a misogi. The idea is simple. Once a year, you take on one truly hard challenge, something that pushes you way, way out of your comfort zone. The rules are key. It has to be really hard, like a 50-50 shot you'll even succeed. And this is the most important part, you can't do it for bragging rights or for Instagram. It's just for you. It's you versus you. So we've laid out the problem, and we've got our prescriptions. But let's bring it all home. What is the ultimate point of all this? What's the payoff for embracing boredom, nature, and physical challenge? Well, it's about more than just being healthier. It's about living a totally different and better kind of life. This quote just nails it. When you push yourself into these uncomfortable places, you find what you think is your limit, and then you push right past it. That moment, when you realize you had so much more in the tank than you ever believed, it changes you. It rewires your brain and makes all of the smaller, everyday stresses of life seem so much more manageable.
But maybe the most profound benefit of all is how this changes your perception of time itself. You know that feeling when the years just seem to blur together and fly by? That happens when our life is all routine. But when we seek out new, challenging, uncomfortable experiences, we create these vivid memories, these impressions in our scrapbook, as one psychologist put it. And those moments act like anchors. They slow down time, making our lives feel longer, richer, and way more meaningful. At the end of the day, this isn't about taking a 33-day trip to the Arctic. It can be something much smaller. It could be leaving your phone at home when you go for a walk. It could be taking a cold shower, or signing up for a 5K that you're not totally sure you can finish. So that leaves just one question, really. What's one small comfort you could give up to start living a more memorable, more resilient, and ultimately a fuller life?